So, yeah, I'm part of BT's innovation team. I am a weird part of the innovation team. Our team is there to innovate with and for people like yourselves. So largely, I work with UK larger corporates, also public sector. We do a lot of innovation in BT, but we are very, very bad at telling anyone about it. So partially, that is my job as well. But as you would expect with BT, a lot of our innovation team are deeply into things like networks and cloud and tech. And I always say I'm half a technologist, and I'm never terribly sure which half exactly, whether it's the slightly boring half or the half that should... I look as if I should be selling ice cream, I think, with this particular waistcoat. But whichever half it is not, I am actually a psychologist by background. And I always claim I look at the most disruptive part of innovation, which is, of course, not the technology at all. It's us, because unless we embrace it and use it, it's a little bit rubbish. So that is my role. So I do a lot of research, basically. I've been researching around things like the future world of work for many, many years. I think we're on our 17th year of running this particular research project around what on earth is going on with work. In fact, my history back on work styles and things like that dates right back into the early 90s when I joined BT at the age of 6 and worked on a number of things, including a very pioneering piece of work called the Inverness experiment, which oddly enough was an experiment we ran in Inverness around, we thought very hard about that title, but that was one of our first, in fact, one of Europe's first homeworking trials. So it was a technology experiment, to be perfectly honest. We just tried to figure out whether the tech would support things like homeworking. I was a very, very small cog in the machine there, looking at the psychology, making sure that people did not go mad whilst working from home. And by the way, they didn't back in the 90s, but in the 90s we did not have wonderful things like 5G, or indeed Wi-Fi, or indeed the internet. So we had to dig people's front gardens up in order to get them working from their homes, which meant that it was way too expensive to do back in the 90s. So a lot of the research now, obviously we went through a pandemic, we had a lot of discussions around that, and now we're kind of emerging, well, not quite out yet, but, you know, emerging, sort of blinking, going, where is this future world of work going? And I think we're in an exciting period in the future world of work at the moment, because we have the ability to change the ways that we work, and we have been doing that. But we need to think about the three critical components. First, it needs to work for the people doing the work. Secondly, it's got to work for productivity, and to be honest, we're not getting any more productive, even though we've got lots of technologies that we're throwing at the problem. And then, obviously, the theme of this conference is that we need to make sure that it's good for the planet as well. So how do we work sustainably into the future too? So I'm going to talk you through some of the themes that we've been looking at. One, of course, is, well, okay, where are we going to be working? How much are we going to be working? And to be honest, there is history behind a lot of this. This is a futurologist of the past. Now, I always say as a futurologist, I tend to not look that far into the future because, frankly, I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen next week. But this guy decided he was going to do a 100-year forecast. So this guy, he was actually, Charles Steinmetz was an engineer. He was looking at there was a lot of innovation going on in the 1920s. I think there's an awful lot of parallels between the 1920s and the 2020s. Lots and lots of world disruption, wars going on, lots and lots of innovation and invention. But he was looking at these technologies and going, wow, this is going to transform the way that we work. So he projected himself just over 100 years into the future, into the year 2023. Oh, hang on. That was 3 years ago. But he was predicting that this technology would free us all up and we would only be working 4 hours a day. Hands up? Yeah. One of the problems we find with tech, largely, is it does take work away, but it often intensifies work. So that's one debate. Are we going to be working 4 hours a day, or are we going to be working longer and longer and longer? There are other trends playing into this. Several have been mentioned already. Certainly, we have, at the moment, one of the lowest birth rates in the world that we've ever had. So we're not getting a lot of young people coming into the workforce. And we also simultaneously have the baby boomers, the implication is in the name, there's a lot of them, trying to retire. Now, Linda Grattan at London Business School, who I've had the pleasure of working with over the years, wrote a fabulous book around longevity called The 100-Year Life. And her question was, if we're living longer, what do we do? And in actual fact, one of the sad things is probably we work longer. And some of those boomers that are retiring are also unretiring because is retirement affordable? Certainly those who are coming into the workforce now are looking at retirement and going, well, that's not going to happen. So we are likely to be working into our 70s, maybe even into our 80s. I know that's slightly depressing, but that's probably how it's going to work. The thing is, does that mean that when we come into the workforce, we look at work in the linear way that we do now? In other words, we go to work, we go to school, we go to university. If we're lucky, we get a number of jobs, and then hopefully somewhere in our 60s, we retire. Probably not. So we're seeing this massive disruption in the world of work. We are also simultaneously seeing AI barging in, and obviously there's a lot of press coverage about the fact that there won't be any jobs to do into the future. I will counter that by saying I think there will be. The thing is, it is eating out a lot of knowledge work. And knowledge work's interesting, and to be honest, as a psychologist, I'm kind of, well, if we look at the ways we work at the moment, which typically are things like 9 to 5, or the old Dolly Parton effect, Monday to Friday, is that the best way for my brain to work? Does my brain work optimally 9 to 5, Monday to Friday? And actually, I mean, that was invented in the Industrial Revolution for a start. So, you know, that was just over 100 years old, that way of working. My brain does not work optimally 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, particularly if AI takes all the easy stuff and I end up doing all of the difficult stuff. My brain actually, according to neuroscience, probably only works optimally on concentrated tasks for about 4 hours a day. So that's why I keep this quote up, because do we need to rethink fundamentally how we work? The trouble is the conversation mostly at the moment is about how many days am I going to be in an office? I'm very bored with this, but I will go through it. Yes, people are coming back to offices, not to the extent that some of the press, again, would claim. We are definitely still seeing, and we've seen it I mean, this has been going on for probably about 15 years, the Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday effect. I will not abbreviate that, because it is rude, but we are also seeing a pickup at the moment on things like a Friday. Now, if you've got this data, certainly from a sustainability perspective, what do you do with it? So certainly in BT, we have these lovely new, very carbon efficient buildings that are mostly empty on a Friday. So we know that, and using data, if you walk into one of our buildings on a Friday, you will now find a little map going, these are the floors that we have opened, and these are the floors that are closed. That way we can start to shut off energy usage on days where we know that floor plates are going to be quite empty. We're not heating, lighting, and cooling an entire building for the 6 people that happen to want to be in on a Friday. So we can use that data really effectively to figure out how we maybe regulate some of that carbon neutrality. However, the reason that we're looking at things like hybrid work as a normal for working at the moment is it works for people. And it kind of works for productivity and the planet as well. For those of you who are interested in this kind of data, the fellow to follow is Nick Bloom over at Stanford. Some of this is his data. But what we are starting to see is, yes, there are people doing 5 days a week at home. Yes, there are people doing 5 days a week in the office, whether mandated or not. They are not necessarily, I mean, the 5 days a week at home are engaged in their work, but they're not necessarily thriving in their work. The problem we have at the moment with people, our employees generally, is that they're not very engaged in their work. In fact, engagement, according to Gallup, who do a yearly survey of engagement, we have 12% of Europe's workers actually engaged in their work, which is the lowest it has ever been. So we're not doing very well for people. But if we look at different work styles, we can start to see that hybrid not only are the highest in terms of engagement, other than the remote employees, but they are also thriving in their work. whereas the fully remote people and the fully on-site people are not. And indeed, Nick has kind of said, well, if you look at things like retention and recruitment, hybrid is a model that actually people like. So that's the reason why I think we are looking at a hybrid model for the future. In BT terms, we call this 3 together, 2 wherever, which is kind of, that's the kind of pattern, the 3-2, the 2-3, that kind of thing. Yeah, we're not going to go into the science of that because that would take too long. So we are seeing this digital-first hybrid because actually the common ground now is not the office, it's digital. We work in a digital space. Home working is not going to go away. It is highly popular. Is it greener? Well, there's a big debate about that. It depends how you're heating, lighting, and cooling your homes. But it does certainly cut down on things like the commute, which is a very big part of the carbon footprint. Obviously, people are coming back to offices, but I think there is, for people that are doing that, there is a very big question around the value of doing it, the value of that commute. Because if you're commuting consistently into an office only to sit at a desk on video calls all day, that is probably not the best use of your time. And of course, there are other options, and I know some of you saw me way back in, was it 2014, when I spoke at this event last time, where I was talking about the concept of the coffice, which is, to be honest, still my recommended way of working. Basically, it's somewhere that's probably local to you, where you go out of you get out of the house, but you're not commuting into a central urban location. For me, I live on Coffee. Interestingly enough, that board up there is my local pub. So we're now looking at the Poffice, maybe. So the pub has noticed it's quite empty during the day. So you pay them £10, you'll get free Wi-Fi, free tea and coffee all day. And then you get not gin and tonic during the day, but you know, at the end of the day, you probably need that gin and tonic and they'll give you a little bit of money off. So we're starting to see, certainly if you look at Republic of Ireland at the moment, they actually have a rural regeneration policy, which is looking at things like pubs around, okay, do we need to commute or can we actually start to regenerate communities as work hubs? This is all the wrong conversation to have, because as Mark Dixon quite rightly points out, it is not about where you work at all. It is about what you are doing, how you're being managed, what tasks you're doing. So, yeah, we are still trying to figure out why people would be in an office. And this is actually Leesman's data. Again, if you want data, Leesman have a lot of data on how people are working. And this is typically, you probably can't read this at the back. In fact, I can barely read it up here. But the top reasons to be in an office, oddly enough, is to meet other people, because we are social creatures. So meetings, collaboration, socializing about work, catching up on the gossip, all of that is the function of a physical space. Interestingly enough, yes, sometimes you are mandated to be in, but yeah, there are some issues around that, which I'll tell you about in a moment. Interestingly enough, the things we tend to measure, things like the physical environment, sustainability, do people come into an office because it's a sustainable office? No, not even on the graph. Even Wi-Fi, which is obviously something we're quite fond about talking about in BT, is very low on the graph because, frankly, who cares? As long as it's there, I don't mind. If it's not there, that's a problem. The trouble is, all of the stuff that's really important to people, we don't tend to measure very well in offices. So things like collaboration. Do people collaborate well in an office? Well, that's a big question. And of course, we are starting to use our own buildings in BT to try and figure out, okay, we know if people are in the office, what are they doing? How are they using the office? Is it actually doing it for them? Can we get them to things that they need when they're, which gives them the value for commutes? The interesting thing is, who is in the office does not point towards whether they're productive. That just says that they are present. And things like card swipe data or Wi-Fi logins can be abused if people don't see the value of being in an office. In psychology, we call this rational cheating. And there are lots of very bizarre behaviours that go on if you mandate people being in an office when they don't see the point. Firstly, you get badge sharing. So I'll bring your badge in today. You can bring mine in tomorrow. Then we get coffee badging, where people come into the office, they scan, they have a cup of coffee, they leave again. Some of the government employees that are being logged around Wi-Fi are logging onto the Wi-Fi in the car park, never getting out of the car. And indeed, there is a startup which I think is still in existence in London that's acting as Uber for your badge. So it will come pick your badge up from your house, take the badge to work, scan it, and bring it back again. Rational cheating in action. So the first thing to say is, it's interesting to know who's in the office, but doing it down to the, I can see that Fred has spent 3 hours in the toilet level, is probably not what you want to do, because frankly, that is creepy. So we want to know, kind of how many people, where they are, what they're doing, and we can use a whole ton of tech to actually figure that out, ranging from, very Bluetooth low energy devices, beacons, all of that lovely stuff. Even things like Wi-Fi can be used to detect a heartbeat, believe it or not. So you can figure out whether your employees are alive, which is also reassuring. And of course, is it a healthy building? And all of you are sustainability people, so we've got loads of building data, but it doesn't actually tell us what the people are using the building for. So it's kind of how can we overlay that? And indeed, help people to find what they need to find, whether it's desks or screens or mice or other people. How do we actually help them, direct them when they're in an office space? So we're using this kind of on ourselves as a test bed to figure out things. However, AI is starting to muscle in. How do we collaborate now? Well, actually, I'm in innovation, so I have to say I don't talk to my innovation colleagues about innovation when I'm thinking about mad ideas. I talk to AI. I collaborate with AI. And increasingly, my knowledge tasks are around collaborating with AI first before I collaborate with people. This is actually Deloitte's data showing this, and showing this, there is a slight difference by age. But actually, increasingly, we are seeing people not just collaborate with people, but collaborating with AI. And again, does that question what the role of an office is for? Is AI going to erode this? It certainly is starting to alter the task structure of jobs. However, it's not good at everything. It's not great at all tasks. Interestingly, the guys at Stanford tried to do an entire company, a simulated company, using agentic AI, which is, of course, the trendy thing to talk about at the moment. For those of you who do not know what an agentic AI is, I keep saying it's like ChatGPT that can do stuff. It's a large language model that can execute things in the background, whether that's managing your email inbox, rather badly, it has to be said, on the basis of what we're seeing so far, or indeed booking your holiday. Now, they simulated an entire company with agents just to see how many tasks these AI agents could complete without human intervention. The answer was about 24% of tasks, and those were the easy things. We are left with everything else. The other problem, particularly with large language models, is they have this tendency to hallucinate, as we know. So they are very convincing, but they are very convincingly wrong. Effectively, we have digitized mansplaining. So the problem here is one of the agents was given the task, go and talk to somebody in this particular experiment and ask them a question. They couldn't find the person. So very creatively, they renamed some other rando that person's name, and they asked the question, and oddly enough, that did not work. So again, workflows and the ways organizations work is not always logical. So AI will struggle at that point. So humans are still involved in this particular loop. There are some challenges, though, around AI and humans. As Dan Kahneman puts very well, the late, great Dan Kahneman, thinking as to humans as swimming is to cats. They can do it, but they prefer not to. So our brains are incredible, but they are inclined to be a little tiny bit lazy. And there are some issues around this, around how do we follow AI or not. The one that worries me a lot is metacognitive laziness. This is also often known as the Google Maps effect. Also, basically, if you've ever been in a car and you've ended up in a river, or indeed lorry drivers. I was watching a lorry driver the other day going down a street that basically was going to get stuck. So the thing is, we tend to override. In fact, our eyes are pointless. We're in some other universe. We're just following a line. And that gets us into trouble, because if we just follow a line blindly, we do end up in a river. And that worries me, because the more that we outsource to AI, the more likely it is that we're going to, firstly, forget what we're doing, but not actually use the evidence of our eyes. There is also the fact that we're eroding experience. I think graduates that are coming in to the job market at the moment are really struggling because there's no bottom rung of the ladder anymore. They're not learning the basic skills because the basic skills are often automated. But the trouble is, to take on the more complex skills, you need the experience at the bottom level of the rung. So how do we make sure that we train those basic skills, a problem for education, but also keep them up to date? Vibe coding is a thing at the moment where I don't need to know how to code anymore. I can just speak English and it generates code at the back. Some of my coding colleagues question that this code is very good, but they know what they're doing. The trouble is, if we generate bad code, the AI then learns all of that bad code and generates more bad code, and that is the general silage problem that we find out with AI. It generates rubbish sometimes, and then it learns from that rubbish, and then it doesn't get as good as it should be. So there is a real problem around how do we use human judgment to quality control a lot of this. Strategic thinking and quality control are the two things we really need as skills into the future. Cognitive offloading is another one. There was a very scary paper written by MIT last year called Your Brain on ChatGPT. And it's kind of obvious that if we use AI to write something, we don't actually understand what's been written. And they proved this, that we offload a ton of stuff to AI, like writing a document, and then send it to somebody who probably also doesn't read the document but uses AI to summarize the document. Basically, there's no understanding here at all. Again, our brains are being lazy. Now, I have to say our brains are brilliant. But to learn, we need friction. And I think that's one of the things that we need to think about as we construct jobs into the future is how do we create friction, sufficient friction, that we learn skills and retain skills without outsourcing all of those skills to AI. And then, of course, everyone knows this, the elephant in the room is AI is not great for the planet. We have data centers eating up all the energy and water in the world. What's the solution to this? Well, there's lots of them, whether putting data centers on the moon or under the sea. Indeed, building mini nuclear power stations on data centers has been suggested. More efficient chips. There is something called neuromorphic computing coming along in the academic field, based on the fact that our brains are remarkable. They typically use about the energy consumption of an average light bulb per day, and yet they compute a ton of stuff that AI obviously exceeds, but often the AI's energy consumption exceeds. So neuromorphic computing is trying to more effectively simulate the brain to use a lot less power. But as AI consumption goes up, the power consumption goes up. And those mini nukes are not going to be in place instantly. It's going to take probably at least 10 years to put a data center on the moon. So we need to be really careful here. I keep saying I'm less worried about the Terminator. I'm more worried about people destroying the Earth by generating endless cat memes. We need to think maybe before we AI as well around that data coverage. I think this is less about automation. I think it's much more about augmentation. Now, if Albert Einstein is right, and I don't know if Albert Einstein actually said this or whether a large language model actually hallucinated it, but he's quite right. Technology, AI, makes us incredibly fast. Doesn't make us right. It makes us fast. Humans are slow, but we can be quite brilliant given the opportunity. So how do we make sure that we can work together? And as Tom Malone at MIT says, we're still learning here. We're still trying to figure out how humans and AI sit together and where we collaborate best and what tasks are best. We are at what Douglas Adams called a 42 moment. For those of you who are fans of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you will know that 42 is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. And 42 was computed by a massive supercomputer called Deep Thought. It took 7.2 million years to come to the answer 42. The trouble was, we forgot what the question was. Now, if the answer's AI, what's the question? I think that's something that we really need to think about as we go into the future. I'm an optimist, I must confess. I think that humans and AI could be really, really powerful together. There are some slightly more pessimistic things, and energy and sustainability is certainly one of them. But how do we harness this technology to make us super-powered? Thank you for listening.